Hello, it's Yoga Sutras time. Yeah, there's Raj with a yoga. Raj and Roz. Namaste, Roz. Wait a minute. She said hi, Roseanne. Is Roseanne here? I didn't see Roseanne.
Hi,
No, there's Rosalind. Rosalind's saying hello to Rosalind, no? She said hi, Roseanne.
And Raj.
And Raj.
Yeah.
But there is no Roseanne.
No, but she probably thought that she would be there because there's a reaction, so maybe.
Oh, there's a reaction up there, but she didn't type yet. Hi, B. Guten Morgen, Hashim.
Where you like?
Anywhere.
Anywhere.
There or there or there or there. Give him some room.
I thought I did. If you want to, sometimes it's.
We have a visitor who's just moved to our community named Cord, who's with us
We
tonight.
have to ask him about the name.
Yeah.
I thought his name was Cord without the D.
Cord. And he said cord. So I said, you mean like rope or whatever? I said, yeah. There's a story behind it, but we don't know what the story is, and it doesn't matter.
No.
But I must say, I've never met a cord before. I have driven an Accord. Accord is a kind of Honda car.
I see.
But that's a chord.
But chord is also to play a chord, right?
You can play a chord. You can play a chord.
Yeah.
But it's not that kind of chord. I hear a person.
It's with his feet?
I hear a person coming. It's a rojo. It's a rojo. She's our resident soldier.
That's your service.
This is Cord. There's food for you.
Okay, nice to meet you.
It was nice meeting you too.
You motorcycle out there?
Mm-hmm. What's your name again?
Robin.
Robin. Okay, I can remember that.
But see, her name is Holzer, so Robin Holzer becomes Rojo. That's what that's about. Rojo.
Yep.
She's in the Air Force.
Oh, that's cool. Huh.
For a little while.
The director in the institute I worked in Germany had a last name Cord.
Uh-huh. Says Raj.
See, Roseanne is there.
Hello, Anjan. Roseanne. There's Roseanne. Hi, Roseanne. Hi, Roz and everyone.
This is streaming live in our Facebook.
Yeah, and so the people who are interested in what we're doing are kind of all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
So Raj hails from India but lives in Savannah, Georgia. Anjan, where is Anjan? I keep forgetting where Anjan is. Help me, Mom. Oh, Anjan, I've done it again. Indiana, Iowa, somewhere in the Midwest. I keep wanting to put her somewhere else, but
I want to keep putting her in.
Roseanne is in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil. Texas!
That's why we keep trying.
That's right, you know. Texas is. I used to live in Dallas, Texas, many years ago. Texas, everything's big there. And Anjan is in Texas. And Hashim is in Germany. And Betty B is in New York City. And Rosalind is in near Philadelphia. Unless you moved around. I think you're still there. Yeah. Anyway. Did you have a good day, Rojo?
Mm-hmm.
Did you heal lots of patients?
Yeah. I even had one gentleman that told me that he gave my advice to his sister who brought her A1C down from 7.5 to 6.4.
Just by listening to the Doc Rojo advice.
Yeah, and it was even before he knew that I had the videos available.
Wow.
His last saw this guy a year ago.
Cool.
So now she'll get the full-fledged advice.
Yeah. All righty. So we're supposed to be talking about Yoga Sutras, and we are in the sutra. I guess I can put this up here. I started this up at the top of this section where we're going through the 8 rungs now. I forgot to pull up here. Well, let me pull this up here real quickly here. I'm a little bit sort of goofy here. I'll pull this up first here. Give me a moment here. See, I can do this like this, and that works too. Anyway, I had never tried that before. But anyway, here we've taken the 196 sutras and broken it up into 39 chunks. And where we are is in our journey, we are in the yamas and the niyamas. We're here. So we've talked all about the definition of yoga and kinds of concentration and meditation and stabilizing the mind. And remember that this first chapter is entitled Samadhi Pada, which is all about the levels of realization of samadhi. And chapter 2, I know this is cursory, but chapter 2 is entitled Sadhana Pada, and sadhana means practices. And so it's the chapter on practices, and we've talked about the idea of minimizing gross colorings of attractions, aversions, and fears, then dealing with the subtle colorings, and then we talked about breaking the alliance of karma with all of the samskaras, and we talked about the introduction to the 8 rungs of yoga and viveka, or discernment. There's chocolate hummus. It's pretty good. Did you have any of it yet?
I had some beets, and I put some of the chocolate hummus in with the beets.
That's where it went. I told you she got it. She accused me this morning of stealing some chocolate hummus out of the refrigerator.
I was just curious when you had ate it.
And I pleaded not guilty, and she
was not guilty.
She didn't believe me. I said, I think I know the culprit.
I took about a half a cup of that and half a cup of the beet mixture.
It was okay. I'm just teasing. She wasn't really upset.
It tasted like fudge.
It's pretty yummy. And anyway, so then here we are. Rung 1 and rung 2 of the 8 rungs are the yamas and the niyamas. And so what we're talking about now is the niyamas. And I started this section here back at the top just so we could scroll down and see. Remember, we looked at the outline. Remember how I lay these things out, where before the sutra I put an introduction that talks about the whole thing. And then we went through the yamas, and then we were coming down here to the niyamas. Cleanliness and purity of body and mind, shaucha, an attitude of contentment, santosh, training the senses, tapas, self-study and reflection on sacred words, svadhyaya, and an attitude of letting go into one's source, ishvara pranadhana, are the observances or practices of self-training, the niyamas, and are the second rung on the ladder of yoga. Remember that rung 1 has primarily to do with the relationship between somebody called me and the external world. And the niyamas has primarily to do with me in relation to who, Ma? To me. What a concept, huh? And of course, in these 8 rungs, every one of them systematically is moving one step further inward, finally ending with the center of consciousness. Okay. There's Gurvinder, and there's Nilesh. Near Dallas. Where about near Dallas, Anjan? I used to live in Dallas in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. Where did I live? I was in Plano a little bit, and I was in Farmers Branch. Boy, I hadn't thought about that name in a long time. What was that, Rojo?
A branch.
Rojo just made a branch symbol. Farmers Branch. Huh. That was a long, long time ago. Long, long time ago. By the airport, yes. But you're on the Dallas side of the airport, I take it, huh? Yeah, obviously. You said Dallas, and if you're near the airport, then you're on the Dallas side of the airport. The other side of the airport, Ma, is Fort Worth. That's why they call it the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, or DFW, because
I've been in that airport.
I know you have. But that's not her favorite. Her favorite airport is the Houston airport. She likes spending the night in the Houston airport. Fares are to go from Amsterdam to Houston and then here to Florida.
And have a 5-hour, 8-hour layover.
And have a 5 to 8 hour layover in Houston, each direction.
Easy $200, $300 made.
But she makes money because the prices are so cheap. When you go from US to Amsterdam and back, it's not cheap like that. So I've never gone
They
that
like
way.
people to come to the US, but they don't like US people to leave.
They don't like the US people to leave. They don't like us to go to Amsterdam.
No.
Anyway, this is not important. DFW, that's right. That's what I was, see, there it is, Mom.
Yeah.
She put it in there for you. It's DFW. You were through DFW.
And
Did we say hello to Nilesh? Hello, Nilesh. I think I missed Nilesh. What?
He was wondering where the microphone is at.
I don't know. It's somewhere in here.
Yeah. Apparently people catch what I'm saying, I guess.
They can hear, Matri. What did you say?
I don't know. Please continue.
I don't know what I'm saying either. You know, these things, we just hang out together. They're not too much formal. Occasionally I get on a roll. But... Huh?
More than occasionally.
Well, Saucha. So Saucha is purity of body and mind. And note here, remember that yoga is traditionally oral tradition. It's not written tradition. And so these sutras that we're going through, before there were printing presses and books and all like that, they were memorized. And so all 196 of them were memorized. And the learning, or we should say the teaching/learning, happened in conversations. And you may recall that sometimes we've run into Swami Rama talking about when he was a young fellow living in the caves in the Himalayas, that one of his elder brother disciples, what was his name? Ninjan? No. Now his name just blanked out on me. Not Narayan. Naranji. But not Narayana. Naranji. Naranji would explain things to him by taking a stick and drawing little symbols in the sand. And so the learning mostly, the reason I'm dragging you through this is mostly conversational. So the sutras themselves are very short and sweet. So it tells you Saucha, and Saucha has to do with purity, purifying the body and mind. But then why does Patanjali, author of the Yoga Sutras, why does he not go into great detail about how to purify the body and mind? And the real answer to that is that's the oral tradition. So you're living together. The old-fashioned way of learning this stuff is you live together for 12 years. And during that time, there's lots and lots and lots of conversations. And in those conversations, that's what brings life to it. So then we gain an understanding of what it means to purify the body and mind. And all the work we do with the body, and Rojo was just telling us about the patient whose relative got better from diabetes because of following the food suggestions that Rojo had given to her patient. But how's your patient doing?
He's working on stuff.
The patient is working on stuff, but he apparently
didn't listen as well as his sister did.
He did not listen as well as his sister, with whom he shared the stuff. See how this is medical advice by oral tradition. So she talks to the patient. He doesn't listen, but he tells his sister what the doctor told him, and she starts changing her dietary stuff, and her diabetes just almost disappears. Goes down to a number that's actually below the threshold of diabetes.
Yeah.
And where she was before was well into the diabetes range of blood sugar, and now is no longer in the diabetes range of blood sugar.
Yeah, and she just told him that like this morning. Yesterday, right before his appointment.
Anyway, I'm just saying that to say that Patanjali is not telling us how to purify body and mind. So we can look at this sutra and say, well, this isn't very thorough stuff. Well, there's all sorts of wisdom on how to purify the body and mind. And so food is one of them. I can remember that Swami Rama used to say, some of his writings would tell people that all of sadhana starts with food. And take care of your body.
Go to the bathroom.
Yeah, go to the bathroom. There was a story that in the early 1970s, people wanted a big retreat. They wanted to really know how to get enlightened. And so he said, okay, they had a big retreat somewhere in like Michigan or somewhere, Wisconsin, I think it was. And they had a whole it was going to be an intensive, a weekend. And he ended up spending, I wasn't there, I heard about it later. They spent the whole weekend talking about bowels.
Good topic.
And the students were all upset. Why did you tell us all about that? He said, because you people are not ready to meditate. You eat terrible, terrible food.
And you can't even poop right.
You can't even poop right because you're all constipated. And he was telling the truth. And so it was saying, no, you need to start with food. And we still have that problem today. Mostly animal-based food with very low fiber. And the system doesn't work cleaning. It doesn't clean well. And then we think we're going to sit down and do samadhi.
Yep.
Anyway, let's see if we got any comments of supporting that. Going, ew. There's Eileen Mullen. Hello, Eileen Mullen. Eileen is in Pittsburgh. I'm telling Cord, who's visiting with us here, where people are, just for the fun of it. Naranji. Raj said Nirvanji. He said Naranji. I never heard the V when Swami Rama pronounces it there.
Oh, I thought it was an R.
It's, yeah, but there's Raj type Nirvanji. I've never heard Swamiji pronounce it with the V in there. Maybe it's there and I'm not hearing it. Naranji. I don't have any idea what it means, but anyway. He sounds like a cool guy, but he was a guy anyway. And Santosh is contentment. And note that Santosh does not mean satisfaction. There's a difference between contentment and satisfaction. When we get what we want, we feel satisfied. But when we're content, our desires may not be satisfied, but we still feel a sense of contentment. I understand that's a very simplified way of saying it, but that's the core difference between what Santosh is about. It in large part, this Santosh business has to do with the personal awareness that in terms of doing sadhana, that in terms of doing meditation and contemplation, I really have what I need. I just got a message from somebody within the last few days that said basically, I will pursue the depths of meditation after I have enough money to live on, when I get a better job. And don't try to figure out who it is, because it's not somebody in this conversation and nobody you know. It's just a completely separate person. And that's speaking of satisfaction when I need more money. I'm not saying that there's not such a thing as money challenges. I'm not so foolish as to say that. But the contentment part is the inner attitude that says if I'm rich or I'm poor, it just doesn't matter. Doesn't mean it doesn't matter. I'm not going to do anything to change my situation and lead a good life. Doesn't mean that. But it means in terms of me being able to sit down and be quiet today, I have enough. If I have a healthy body and a healthy mind, saucha, if I'm doing a reasonably good job with that, then what I have in my life right now is enough. I can sit and be quiet. Rojo's sitting on the floor on a cushion right now.
You shared this before, but when we talk about asanas that are so common for a yoga world today, and the more modern other version of yoga, where asana is the preliminary, the main focus. If I would put it in the 8 rounds, I put it in saucha, because it helps purifying the mind, it helps purifying the body, and at the end of a modern yoga class, we do asana and then shavasana, and there's a lot of contentment when you leave.
Can everybody hear? Can somebody take? Are you hearing Ma, or should I drag her over here onto a chair? Because it's a very good point. Asana of Patanjali is rung 3, which means sitting posture. But what Maitreya is pointing out is that most of what is being done in modern postural yoga is actually a process of saucha.
Yes, and the effect of a asana class where you stretch and do the postures for about, let's say, an hour, and then have a short relaxation, and that's most of what the classes are these days about. Then people leave with a santosh. Then the day and their lives at that moment are in a state of contentment, and then they accept the way it is. So I put it there.
Yeah, I would not see it quite the same way as you just said. I liked everything you said about the purity of body and the fact that has. Mm-hmm. But to say that is the contentment that is santosh of the second niyama, I question that strongly. That's just not it. I have met too many people coming out of postural yoga studios whose inner mind is anything but content, nowhere near santosh.
But they feel a piece of quiet and calm.
Well, there's a little piece of quiet, so there's benefit in that. But
you can see how it leads to. Maybe they don't really
it's
get
very
there.
beneficial.
That's more what I say.
But I wouldn't call it santosh. Anyway. So we're just looking at the sutras here. Yes. Tapas has to do with training the senses. Tapas is about the 10 indriyas. Austerities, when I put this together, I chose words that were in common use because I wanted to provide a variety, but it actually has mostly to do with training the senses. And tapas, the root of the word tapas is fire. And so it means having the stamina to ride through the emotional firestorm of training the senses. If you think of a simple example of trying to break your habit, we talk about the donut store that's down the street. And if you're trying to break your donut habit, you go into donut withdrawal. There's probably a much better example, but I'm just being playful with that. And so there is an emotional response to self-training. We all know this. And so
yeah, after 20 years of drinking of coffee in the morning and you stop
20 years of drinking coffee in the morning.
It's not that the day after that's going to be all...
There's withdrawal.
Yeah, there's withdrawal and to really have... There's a resistance.
And understanding that is a good example of tapas.
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding that I have to ride through this.
Right through
and the relation of this in our attempt to meditate, as most of you know, in this conversation, nobody in this conversation is new to this. Most of you know that when you start a practice of meditation, it's very common. You say, wow, this is great. I feel such calm and peace of mind. And come back 6 months later or a couple of years later, and they're saying, life was pretty good. Life was pretty good until I started this crazy meditation. And now my mind is driving me crazy, and it has to do with this unconscious mind. And so when the conscious mind becomes quiet, this may take some months or a year to do it. But then when the conscious mind becomes quiet, the unconscious starts to come forward.
And you feel like you're going backwards.
You feel like you're going backwards, exactly. And to have some degree of maybe even just intellectual understanding, but to have some degree that this is just part of the process and I can ride through this emotional firestorm is the spirit of what the tapas is about. Okay?
Okay.
And svadhyaya.
So if you get a little heat under your feet, just keep going.
If you get a little heat under your feet. I said feet under your heat.
Yeah.
And so what do you do if you get heat under your feet? Keep going. Ishvara. Here, I called it.
Well, they could hear me, so I can go sit on the couch.
They can hear you.
Yeah,
they could hear you. Okay, so you don't want to sit beside
me.
I
know that I will, but there's a comment there.
Right, if one is content, okay. If one is content, then the energies are not as dissipated, and therefore one has the inner strength to withstand the fire of klesha. Yes, very well said, Raj. Very, very well said. They're in an order for a reason. And when we have conversation about this and ponder on it like Raj just did, all of a sudden this sentence pops out of Raj and we say, yes, okay, that's nail on the head. And this is how we ponder with these things. And then we realize, okay, I think maybe Patanjali is onto something here. And I think maybe I'll just keep playing with this and practicing with this.
And to see the sequence in which they build upon each other also then has to be said that even though they are in a sort of sequence, they don't have to be perfected before you go to the next
they're
step.
Not perfected. Most
but
of us
they
don't.
all increase and they all, there's an increasing working together.
And so Ishvara Pranadhana, Ishvara is commonly translated as big G-O-D. But there's something unfortunate. We've talked about this many times and read quite a few things where Swami Rama has talked about this. In fact, at another time we just finished today going through his introduction to the Mandukya Upanishad book called Enlightenment Without God, which is, of course, not anti-God. But when we take Ishvara, the Sanskrit yogic term Ishvara, and translate it into English, mostly we don't have this concept. So we end up simply calling it God. And where we get into trouble is accidentally we project onto the word Ishvara the meaning of God that is common to the religions of our indigenous culture. And so that's inaccurate. It's not the same. It's not what the yogis mean. Now, if one starts with some version of, I guess this sounds a little sarcastic, but the idea of God in the sky, sort of thing, it's a stepping stone. The Bhagavad Gita is a good example because it's poetry. Well, a lot of people view the Bhagavad Gita almost like it's a Bible, and that what we're supposed to do is worship the man, Krishna. And so artists make some beautiful statues, and there's Krishna, and we're all going to worship the statue of Krishna. And this is okay. It's a stepping stone, but it's not what the actual subtler meaning of it is about. And I'm mentioning that only as an example. So when I put these translations here, I use the word God because it's a common thing that happens. And sometimes it has been called supreme guru or teacher. But it actually means that ground, that causal field, the source, or the field out of which everything arose. Pranadhana means developing constant awareness of that. And
surrendering to it.
And surrendering into it. Yes. And this, when I put this together, this is just a restatement of the same things. It should be, I don't think we need to go through all of this in detail, but it should be self-evident that having a healthy body, a clear mind, and regulated senses is necessary if we wish to sit for meditation and experience the depths of self-realization. The 5 Niyamas are a means for self-training in relation to body, senses, and mind. Action, speech, and thought. It is easy to mistakenly lump these three together as if they are one concept. Actually, there are 3 separate practices which work together intimately. To cultivate self-awareness or mindfulness of action, speech, and thoughts as separate entities is very important. Witness your actions as an independent practice, though related to the others. Witness your speech as an independent practice, though related to the others. Witness your thoughts as an independent practice, though related to the others. This is just me saying this because this phrase, action, speech, and thoughts, is a pretty common phrase. And if we don't pull it apart, we can end up accidentally spending years doing practice and never really getting around to actually doing this. So it means, and we all know this, we've talked about this many times, when you look at another person, we can see the person's body language. That is their actions. Thank you. She turned off the thing there. I was blocking.
Oh, I don't know where this is it, right?
That's it.
There.
That's it. Thank you. Matri now has her own BeLive software. And so this morning I was showing her how to do this stuff, and so now she's being more proficient than me at seeing it, or it's nice to have the help to be able to spot that. Anyway, what I was starting to comment on there, we all know how to read the body language of another person, right? We see a person's actions and we can read we may read it incorrectly, but we all can read the body language of another person. You can tell if somebody you know well, if they're having a bad day. You can see it in their face and their expression. And you say, "You having a bad day?" You know,
Yeah.
or yeah, huh?
Yeah.
You're not having a bad day, are you?
No.
No? Yeah, we can do that. And so if we can observe the actions of another person, then we should observe our own actions and be aware of the motions of our body. We should be aware of our own speech and the words that are coming out of our mouths. And we will learn something by observing our own speech. Doesn't mean that somebody has a rule book of what's proper things to say. But if we observe our own speech.
This is nice about both the yamas and the niyamas, the commitments towards yourself in relation to the outside world as to yourself, is that there's no rule book.
Yeah.
And you have to find out the line of,
and we have to sort it out
when
ourselves.
something is useful or not useful.
Yeah. And thoughts, it means observing your own thinking process within. Becomes aware of the inner process related to actions. What do you think, Mom? Should we go through all those in detail? Or
I could read. I don't know.
You can read if you want.
At the same time that one is aware of actions in the external world through practicing the yamas, he or she also becomes aware of the personal inner processes related to body, senses, and mind by practicing awareness of the niyamas. By mindfulness and self-awareness, you see when your actions are contrary to the niyamas as well as the yamas, and you can counter that by noting that that action is not useful and acting more in line with the niyamas. Through similar mindfulness and self-awareness of speech in relation to the niyamas, you see when your speech is contrary to the niyamas. This can also be countered that by noting that speech is not useful and speaking more in line.
That is not, that's a typographical error. That word should not be there.
That's why I stumbled on it.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. And speaking more in line with the goals of the niyamas. The subtlest level of self-awareness and self-regulation is that of thought in the inner world. Each of the niyamas are consciously practiced at the level of thought. By mindfulness and self-awareness, you see when your thoughts are contrary to the niyamas, and you can counter that by noting that the thought is not useful and promoting positive thoughts that are more in line with the niyamas. And there's another section you can look at if you want to dive on, but that you can do in your own time.
Yeah. We've seen this before. Let's click on it briefly. It's talking about basic 7 skills to
relaxing
cultivate.
the body, sitting in a comfortable, straight, steady posture, making your breath serene, witness objects, traveling in a train of mind, inspecting the quality of thoughts, promoting the thoughts that are helpful, and not allowing yourself to be disturbed in any situation.
There you go.
One breath.
One breath. Well read.
Coloring or klishta. It is extremely important to understand the subtler context of the coloring, klishta, involved in the niyamas. That is ultimately what is ultimately most important is the coloring or klishta qualities of the subtle mental traces or samskaras in the karmashaya, as these form the veil that blocks the direct experience of the center of consciousness. It is not that I am an impure body, cluttered mind, or a sensory addict, etc. Rather, it is the thought patterns deep in the basement of the mind, chitta, which have been colored in some way, which in turn affect the body, mental processing, and the sensory attractions and aversions.
Now note here where I put these hyperlinks in here, it's not so that we have to go chasing them all down. But one of the key things that makes Yoga Sutras and all of these practices so difficult is that we have to juggle them. You have to understand one principle to be able to understand another. And you have to sort of remember it. I hope that makes sense.
And so you can quickly take a peek if you...
And so this is meant, these are put here so that if you're going through this, you can jog your memory. You know, these form the veil. 1.4. What does that mean? Sutra 1.4. It means at other times when one is not in the state of self-realization, the seer appears to take on the form of the modifications of mind field, taking on the identity of those thought patterns. So Matri forgets that she's Atman and thinks that she's a Matri.
Yes.
Oops.
And
so anyway, that's why these things are here. And you know, sometimes we sort of look at them, and here is the 4 functions of mind article. And so if you spend some time
cruising on your website,
cruising through your website, this is the reason that these are here.
It's nice to get sort of lost on a trail of just inquiry as you move through.
Yeah. The metaphor I keep thinking of is juggling. If you've ever tried to juggle balls in the air, you got to get into a real mindset to have all these balls juggling in the air at one time.
You can do up to 3.
Yeah, you can easily do up to 3, but it takes a little getting accustomed to doing it. And you throw a ball up and all of a sudden, and then you throw it up here, and you got to be able to catch this one at the same time you're throwing this one. And that's really how you practice. And so we're juggling these balls. Most of us have some skill that we're good. Look what happens when we're using a computer. when you first use your cell phone or your computer, it's real confusing. All these apps and all of these pull down menus, but give yourself a little bit of time and you're zipping through all those menus. And we're juggling menus on the computer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that principle. And so the Yoga Sutras journey, all of the yoga journey, the journey of self-realization, is similar to that. And somehow, most of us, we tend to forget that. We think, well, this is supposed to be easy. And this is the biggest adventure of humanity. And it's not easy. And just by being aware of this is very useful.
To understand not only the gross but also the subtle aspects of self-training through the Niyamas, it is necessary to also understand the nature of the senses and mind in yoga. The senses, indriyas, are of 10 kinds, 5 of which are means of expression, karmendriyas, and 5 of which are means of cognition, jnanendriyas. And again, there's an article.
I'll click on that briefly just so you can see the picture.
There you go.
And this picture captures it all. There's an internal world, whatever we call it, and there's a world out there. And basically 2 things happen. Now, all of us, every one of us already knows this, but we never pause to realize it. You and I do actions out in the world. That's this arrow. And yogis call it karmendriyas. And we have cognitive senses, 5 cognitive senses called jnanendriyas. Jhana means cognition and karma means action. So the indriyas of action and the indriyas of cognition. The very simple way of saying it is that in here, I express outward and I get data in. I can speak to Matri and I can see her and I can hear her speak back to me.
Yes.
It's basically that simple.
5 entry and exit doors.
Yes.
The mind, manas, as thinking instrument, is one of the 4 aspects of the inner mental instrument called antakarana, which is also described in that article. And
again, there's a simplicity to it, but most of us have to struggle with it for a while until we quit struggling. Mm-hmm. And then we realize, wow, there's really something to this. Manas, chitta, ahamkara, buddhi. It's a very old metaphor. We've talked about it many times. It comes for thousands of years old, that it's like a wheel. And so the exterior, it's not a square wheel here, it's a round wheel.
A little bumpy road.
I put it in a box, so it's a little bit of a bumpy wheel. Anyway, the external part of the wheel is like a bicycle wheel, which is the wheel that meets the road. And there's 4 spokes on the wheel. The center hub of the wheel doesn't move, and that's the center of consciousness, the capital S self, the Atman. And without the axle, the wheel doesn't turn. And there's 4 spokes on this wheel, manas, chitta, ahamkara, and buddhi. And this article here that this link to is an attempt to try to talk about those 4 functions of mind. We don't need to do it right now.
They show us the operating of the inner world.
But anyway, that's this down here.
Yes.
And so this is mind. And it seems complicated, but it's simply one antakarana. An anta means inner, karana means instrument. So it's the totality of our inner instrumentation that allows the deepest level of me to be able to operate out in the world out here.
I often say to the Dutchies that there is a clear manual of the mind of how it functions. Like you go get a new device or something. Like
a clear manual?
Yeah. You have like an operating manual of how it
and what you have a manual?
I think the yogis have a pretty clear overview of how the mind functions.
You're saying that the Yoga Sutras and all this stuff is a manual
of the mind. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's the part I wasn't hearing you say. Yeah.
So like
I thought you were saying you already have it. I said most people I've met don't have it.
No.
No, what did I overlook? What did I miss?
No, this is the nice thing about the yogis. They try to share this with us. There's a clear manual of the mind. This is how it functions.
Yes.
Like, when you buy a washing machine, you get a manual, like an instruction manual.
Yeah.
With it. It allows lot less complicated than.
But whoever reads the manual on how to use a washing
That's
machine,
so last century. I know that, but
you
for the
just-
mind,
and the same with computers. Whoever looked at the manual with their computer, and, they give you tutorials on how to use your computer. Nobody looks at it, and you say, "Oh, it's intuitive."
Mm-hmm. You have an Apple. I don't.
Yeah. It's being kind of quiet here.
Yeah, maybe they're bored.
Maybe they're bored. This is pretty good stuff, I think.
I think so too. It's the best stuff around. The more you have lovingly, may I highlight lovingly, trained yourself through the Niyamas, then the more naturally will come the other steps to meditation and higher experience. The meditation can then in turn enhance the way you relate with the world and with yourself. In this way, all the rungs or limbs of yoga work together.
Yeah.
Now we get a quote from Swami Rama.
This is a Swami Rama quote on Ishvara.
In the Upanishad, the word Ishvara is used to denote a state of collective consciousness. Thus, God is not a being that sits on a high pedestal beyond the sun, moon, and stars. God is actually the state of ultimate reality. But due to the lack of direct experience, God has been personified and given various names and forms by religions throughout the ages. When one expands one's individual consciousness to universal consciousness, it is called self-realization. For the individual self has realized the unity of diversity, the very underlying principle or universal self beneath all forms and names. The great sages of the Upanishads avoid the confusions related to conceptions of God and encourage students to be honest and sincere in their quest for self-realization. Upanishadic philosophy provides various methods of unfolding higher levels of truth and helps students to be able to unravel the mystery of the individual and the universe.
Yeah, good stuff. Now, these sutras we're coming in here are a little bit difficult, but if we hold it gently, we can. If you haven't revisited this is one of those places that it's probably very useful to revisit quite a few times, because there's a subtlety to it that is easy to miss. When these codes of self-regulations, the yamas or observances, the niyamas, are inhibited from being practiced due to perverse, unwholesome, troubleness, or deviant thoughts, principles in the opposite direction or the contrary thought should be cultivated. Now, there's a mouthful of words in there, and it's easy to get them goofed up in there. Let me try to make up an example here. Yamas, take ahimsa. If my practice of non-harming is inhibited from being practiced, what does it mean? It's inhibited from being practiced due to perverse, unwholesome, troublesome, or deviant thoughts. That's the part of the sentence. So my stance, I'll turn this on so this will help. My stance of ahimsa is being inhibited or blocked because I'm internally mad at Matri. See, I'm upset with Matri because of what she did to me. So if I'm feeling that towards her, what happens to my practice of non-harming? It's inhibited. Can you hear that?
Disturbed by.
Disturbed by.
And you're then thus not being non-harming towards me.
And so I say I'm practicing non-harming, but because I'm having a perverse, opposite, troublesome thought about her, then therefore I'm not doing the non-harming.
Which you would like to practice.
But there's a good chance, here's the subtlety, the important subtlety of this. If I'm doing that in a relationship with somebody, particularly a coworker or a family member, there's a pretty good chance that I'm not going to be aware of it. And if somebody else tries to tell me that I'm doing that, I will defend against it. Think about this that we're talking about here. And you realize, wow, this is kind of how it works. But if in a moment we catch ourselves, if I catch myself realizing that my non-harming is to be inhibited because I'm having thoughts of pushing against her, if I'm aware of that, then look, there's a comma here. Right here, there's a comma. Then what do? Principles in the opposite direction should be cultivated. Now here's a way of saying that trap. It's very common. It's very, very common in yoga circles to translate the word ahimsa, non-harming, as love. And so what we should do is practice love. Well, it's extremely important to understand that that's not what the instruction is. If I'm quietly, unconsciously mad at Matri for whatever it is, and everybody around is saying, cultivate love for Matri, I say, okay, Matri, everything's really okay. Have you ever watched this happen in a relationship between two people? Two people are sitting there ready to kill each other. Marriage therapists know this because they see the couple come into therapy and they're trying to pretend that everything is beautiful.
And they have one of those really
and you say, how are you? And you say, I'm fine. How are you? You say, I'm fine.
We're having a good marriage.
Yes, our marriage is very, very good and very loving. Does this sound recognizable to everybody? That's the thing. So we're not seeing it. If I realize that it is going on, then I can practice the opposite direction. The opposite direction of pushing against her is not loving her. Listen to this very carefully. I'm pushing against her emotionally, mentally. I'm doing it with my hand to make the point. I'll turn this off here so you can see it better. I'll hide that. You can see it better. So if I'm pushing against her, cultivating the opposite of this is not unconsciously continuing to push on her and say, I love you, Matri. Everything's okay. We're going to be okay. You see, I'm still pushing on her. That's not the solution. The solution is I need to recognize that I'm pushing against her. And to cultivate the opposite, what Patanjali is saying, is not to cultivate love. To cultivate the opposite of pushing against her, listen to this. It's amazingly simple. The solution is stop pushing. The opposite of pushing is the cessation of pushing. Can you hear that? I hope so, because it's an extremely important point that almost every one of us overlooks until some troublemaker like me pushes it, drives it home over and over and over. Realize, wait a minute, Patanjali says cultivate the opposite. Well, I'm going to cultivate love for her. No, that's not the instruction. The instruction is be aware that I'm pushing against her, and that the cultivating the opposite of that is to cease pushing. And I hope that makes sense. We keep revisiting this, and it's an extremely important point. And then I've written about this in here. I don't think we need to read through it. Maybe I'll make one of these days a separate little video and walk through this a little bit and post it.
There's been a lot about non-pushing in the table talk. It's been great.
There's been a lot going on, and thank you for those who are participating. There's some really rich stuff going on in the table talk group.
Yeah, that they're pushing.
Yeah.
Out of their habits, out of their wishes.
The Yamas and Niyamas give superb suggestions for living and being. However, the most important suggestion is on what to do when you are not acting, speaking, or thinking the way you want. When not following the suggestions. For example, you want to practice ahimsa, which is what I was just talking about. And what you can do is remind yourself that this is not useful. So internally, I catch myself at this, and internally I realize, wait a minute, I'm pushing on Matri, or my wife, or my children, or my parents, or my coworkers, or my employees, or somebody.
Or your dog.
Or my dog, yes, or my dog. And realize this is what I'm doing, and this is not useful. And so I highlighted this down here just to make the point that it can be as simple, and it's not memorizing a script, but it's as simple as saying, mind, this is not useful. This is going to bring me nothing but more suffering and lead me into greater ignorance of truth. Mind, you need to let go of this.
Thank you. And I will instantly feel.
Now, here's the beauty of this. She will feel better. But the beauty of this, and this is how we can end up accidentally missing the point here, that if we cease pushing, it opens the door for the love.
Yeah.
Then the love is there. But if we skip the part in the middle, then we end up unconsciously lying to ourselves. And that's not useful. See, there it is. That's not useful. If we do that, then we're lying to ourselves, which is one of the yamas, is to be truthful. And I may not be stealing money, but I'm not being honest with myself or the other person. I'm lying to myself. I say, no, I'm sweet, kind, loving. I never say anything bad. And it's a setup. So we want to be aware, not because we're bad people and we're sinners and we need to be aware of what's wrong with me. We need to be aware of that we're just not, we're not living up to what we said we were going to do. And we need to cultivate the opposite. Okay? The contrary training will lead the mind in the right direction. How do we do this? We use discrimination. And let's see there. I'm thinking
It's enough for tonight.
Let's enough, and we'll come back and do Sutra 34. This stuff is loaded with subtleties in here, and it's extremely useful
And practical.
and very, very practical
To be observed in daily life.
to be observed in daily life. And so we'll come together next time with little Matri will join me, and together maybe we can help make some sense of this. And I guess our next Yoga Sutras time is Saturday. Huh? So, and everybody's been quiet here all of a sudden. Huh?
Just putting me in the frame.
Yeah, putting you in the frame.
Mm-hmm. That's most important. You were constantly pushing me out of the frame. So.
But nobody's typing in the comments box.
They're here.
Thank you. Have a lovely night. Yeah, okay, good. Om Tat Sat. Om Tat Sat. There it is. Oh, thank you all for playing.
Yeah. Next is on Friday.
Next is on Friday, and that I think I'm continuing with, I think that's when we start verse 1 of the Mandukya Upanishad in Enlightenment Without God. More to be continued. Huh?
We've got a thanks from Hashim and Gurvinder.
We got to thank you.
All surrendered into Ishvara,
there
says
you go.
Raj.
Very good. It is. All surrendered to Ishvara. Yes. One of the things I like about thinking of Ishvara is the creative source from which we come, is we don't have to give it a name. When I let go of it, if my focus is on who I'm letting it go, let go to, it has a different feeling. If I let it go, then I've let it go. Well, it doesn't matter to whom it goes.
It just goes.
It's not mine. I have let go of it.
Yeah.
And wherever it goes back to where it came from.
Yeah.
And if I'm still hanging up.
No, I don't want to let go to you.
I don't want to let go here. I want to let go over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, in which case, of course, obviously, I'm not letting go of anything.
I don't know if he had a question or stretching his arm.
Am I correct in saying that Ishvara is consciousness itself? Because it's supposed to be the creative source of all things, right? And isn't that consciousness?
Pretty much so, yeah. Patanjali speaks of it as being an untainted consciousness, the universal untainted consciousness.
Pure mind.
Yeah, that's one of the terms that is sometimes used, pure mind. And so this is a place where there's actually no conflict between various traditions. Where we get into trouble is when somebody gives it a personified name and says, I'm supposed to surrender to Allah, or I'm supposed to surrender to Yahweh, or I'm supposed to surrender to
Spaghetti
Christ.
monster.
Huh?
There's the spaghetti
I'm supposed
monster.
to surrender to the spaghetti monster. And in which case, we get ourselves all balled up. But when we think of it, as you just said, universal mind or consciousness or something, there's no problem.
All the names are going to fall short.
All the names fall short. And
Yeah.
we realize, wait, it has something to do with consciousness. And in some sense, I don't need to think much about, if I'm letting it go, I don't need to think much about where it's going to. I'm letting it go. When we clean the dishes in the sink, now I'm not saying we don't care. It would be better if we humans cared more about pollution and all like that. But when you take your bowl and you wash it out in the sink, you don't follow every little scrap of stuff down the pipes into the sewer to see where it goes.
That will still be attached.
That we would still be clinging to it. I have not let it go.
Yeah.
I'm not going to wash my dish off because I don't know where, Well, so we screw up the environment so bad that metaphor becomes a little bit sloppy, but the principle is there. But yes, that's on track. Om. The Raj says Om. So, okay, we'll give Raj the last word, and a fine word that is, it is. Om Tat Sat. Thank you all for playing.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. In honor of the Dutchies, Dewey Dewey.
Dewey, although they're all asleep.
They're all asleep, but yeah. Guten Nacht, Hashim.
Guten Morgen.
Guten Morgen. Yeah, it's Morgen, isn't
Haben
it?
einen sehr schönen Tag.
I knew what that meant.
Good.
Haben eine guten Meditation.
Meditation.
Whatever, like
Whatever
that.
it is.
Whatever it
Whatever
is.
it is.
Have a nice meditation. Remember, what we're looking for is to be found in the silence after the Om.
Yes.
That's what it's all about. Click, click. Okay, good night, all. Thank you for playing. I'm going to push the button, Rob. Bitte. Sie said, I know, bitte.
Danke bitte. Tschüss.
Cheese.
Tschüss.
Tschüss.
Yeah, that's bye in German.
Tschüss.
Tschüss.